Star Wars vs. the Borg, Episode 3, The Art of Resistance. Grand Admiral Thrawn has been captured by the Borg. After decades of preparing in the Outer Rim, the Borg have begun a full-scale invasion of the New Republic, having already assimilated much of the galaxy. The only defense against the Borg has been a combination of Mon Calamari weapons, Thrawn's tactics, and the unique force abilities of a Jedi apprentice, Thrawn's nephew, Zien. With Thrawn missing in action, Zien can no longer predict where the Borg will strike next, and hope dwindles for those who fight to preserve freedom for all the sentient beings in the galaxy. On the Mon Calamari cruiser Home 1, the hologram of Mon Mothma, Chancellor of the New Republic, appeared in front of Admiral Ackbar, Zien, and Luke Skywalker. She elaborated on the state of the war with the Borg.
Since Thrawn has disappeared, the Borg have assimilated Mandalore, Magito, Ord Mantell, and a dozen other major planets. Soon they will be within strike range of the core worlds. Are the Mon Calamari no longer countering the Borg adaptation?
We are, Ackbar said. Our weapons can damage them, and our shields are effective, but it isn't enough. Borg tactics have changed. They are able to predict where our fleet will be, attack us where we are weakest, and assimilate worlds in ways we cannot anticipate.
I thought we had a Jedi who could tell where they will attack.
Zien shook his head. For some reason, I can no longer find the Borg in force projection. All I get are glimpses of art. Luke nodded as if he wasn't surprised. And why do you think that is? It's my uncle. It's Thrawn. They're using him. After a pause, Luke said, We have one counter left that might prove effective. The Borg might not be able to adapt to a squadron of stealth X-Wings with force-guided shadow bombs. And we have 8 Jedi pilots who've been training for this.
Perhaps for a short time, Master Skywalker, Ackbar said. But we need something more. Will recapturing Thrawn diminish their new tactical skill, I wonder?
Zien shook his head. You can recapture Thrawn, but the Borg will use everything he has ever known against us. Besides, they will be expecting that. I must try to find them again in the Force. At the conclusion of the meeting, Zien told Skywalker that he must return to the Saber. Why do you stay on that old dreadnought, Zien? Surely you'd have an easier time on Home 1. The Saber has grown on me. It has become my mobile home, its crew my friends. And it's where my uncle wanted me. Luke could hear a bit of pain in Zien's voice. I would like to help you. Do you think Raxilian would be open to hosting a squadron of Jedi pilots? Zien chuckled. Maybe if you paid him or helped him raid some unfortunate fat merchant, I could make arrangements. Come on. On board the Saber, Luke Skywalker, Raxilian, and Zien gathered on the bridge.
Well, I don't think even the Borg or Thrawn as a Borg will predict you hiding a squadron of fighters on this dreadnought, Raxilian said and chuckled. But really, what can you do? Seems like the galaxy is lost. Time to hide.
Zien, you said all you could see was art. What kind of art? Anything you recognize? Yes, come to think of it. Some of it was familiar. Then I want you to force project again, and follow the most familiar pieces. See where it leads. Luke helped Zien fall into a force healing sleep. When Zien projected his force body into the abyss to find the Borg, sculptures, paintings, art pieces of every conceivable type floated in the abyss. Some were well known and familiar to all. A few were familiar to only a few, and one in particular began to define itself. The firebrand of Raxilian's pirate gang, as if it were trying to reach out to him. Zien held onto this image and flew into it with his force body. And then suddenly, he was in a wilderness with an ocean breeze and the sounds of nature. I knew you'd come, albeit fashionably late. A familiar voice rang out from behind. Zien turned and fought to keep emotion out of his voice when he saw who it was. Uncle. The emotion bubbled up in spite of Zien's efforts to control it. His voice cracked when he said, It's good to see you. Where am I? And how are you here? Thrawn gestured to the scenic environment and said, This is Unimatrix Zero. Unimatrix Zero? Not 1, 2, or 3,000? Unimatrix Zero. An alternate band of virtual being, where thousands of Borg drones in the collective can be individuals for a time. Walk with me, I'll show you. The two strolled through the scenic forest, where several other people of varying species talked, played, and seemed to live happily. Some would appear out of thin air, and others would disappear, as if this were a normal occurrence. As Borg, when we are in our regeneration cycles, we can exist here free of the collective's influence. I have learned that many of these individuals are either force-sensitive like you, willful, or extremely intelligent. When we wake up from our regeneration cycle, we have no memory of this place, and when we are here, we have no memory of where we are or what we were doing as Borg drones. This is all fascinating, and I'm glad to see you, but the Borg are moving into the core worlds. They are harder to anticipate, and I cannot see them with the force projection as I once could. Thrawn nodded. This is all due to my assimilation. They are using my knowledge for tactics, but have also somehow found a way to shield their movements from you. Then, what good is this Unimatrix Zero other than sanctuary for the egos of former individuals? There is something. Let me show you my new art gallery. Xian and Thrawn entered a domed building. Inside was an art museum the likes of which Xian had never seen anywhere in the galaxy. Thousands, perhaps millions of pieces of art were displayed there. This is a collection of all the art pieces known to the Borg, imaged from memories of all the assimilated drones. One could spend 1,000 lifetimes studying them and never see them all. In the center of the gallery was an image of a building. The building was an archaeological marvel, similar to the towers on Coruscant, but with detailed etchings all upon its surface. This is Teres, the tower of the governing council of elders. Teres, Xian said with astonishment. Thrawn nodded and said, The Borg are studying this art to help them anticipate the resistance on Teres. A trick they learned from me, but make no mistake, the Borg can study art. It doesn't mean they can understand it. Why is that? Art is strongest when it inspires others to create, to become innovative and try new concepts. The Borg are capable of little creativity. True creativity is beyond order or logic. It's an impression of all that is embedded within consciousness, or the force, perhaps, that touches our perceptions. And how does that help us? The Borg could not anticipate Unimatrix Zero, an element such as yourself or the Force, but there are now billions assimilated into the Borg collective and only thousands here. We must first bring all the Borg drones as individuals into Unimatrix Zero. Then we must trigger their memories. They must remember that they are individuals and awaken virtually all at once. I'm not even sure how to begin with that. To bring all the Borg into Unimatrix Zero, we will need to, at least temporarily, make the entire collective Force-sensitive. They must assimilate the Force. But how? Thrawn looked away suddenly before Xian could ask another question. My regeneration cycle is almost complete. Listen carefully. Eventually, the Borg collective will become aware of Unimatrix Zero. You only have one opportunity. The next target is obviously Teres. You must let Luke Skywalker. Thrawn disappeared before he could finish the statement. Xian woke up with a jolt. Teres. Teres is the next target. Luke helped Xian to his feet. Master Skywalker, I've made contact with Thrawn. He wants you to attack. The space battle for Teres had little structure or order. The 40 Borg cubes were swarmed with fighters, and 100 Mon Calamari cruisers in no formation, slugging it out with the cubes at long range. Luke Skywalker's squadron of 8 stealth X-Wings strafed each Borg cube, using the Force to help aim and guide their shadow bombs at the Borg tractor beam emitters, or anything that looked like a weapon, rendering each cube it strafed vulnerable to conventional attack. Something changed when the attack began on the 9th cube. Immediately after launching the shadow bombs, Luke's danger sense stabbed at his gut. The shadow bombs impacted, but the tractor beams and weapons on the Borg cube weren't diminished. In seconds, all 8 of the X-Wings were trapped in the Borg's tractor beams. "Master, that was the last of our shadow bombs," one of Luke's companions said. "I know. They planned this. We'll just have to fight our way through on the inside." Luke readied his lightsaber. The X-Wings were pulled into the Borg superstructure. Dozens of drones surrounded the X-Wings when they set down. Luke ignited his lightsaber, force leaped from the cockpit, and sliced apart 6 drones with wide, glowing green sweeps in less than a second. The other Jedi managed similar maneuvers. They carved out a perimeter of sliced-up drones around their X-Wings, but there was no place for them to go. Eventually, the lightsabers began to bounce harmlessly off the drones with a flash of green light. They had adapted to lightsabers. Luke saw one of his apprentices fall, where a drone stuck his neck with the simulation tubules. "No!" Luke yelled. He flung out his hands and released a storm of force lightning that took down dozens more drones in an instant. Luke stopped himself before the lightning grew out of control and reached his remaining companions. In a moment of depletion, Luke was struck from behind and blacked out. When Luke regained consciousness, he saw a female Borg's disembodied head, metal spine attached, descend from above. The spine snaked into a female drone body, and grapplers helped the head settle into place. The female Borg opened her eyes, breathed deeply, and rotated her shoulders. Luke was immobilized, suspended in a force field of some kind. He felt the force, but it was as if he was force-pinched. On the left side of the Borg Queen was an assimilated chiss. That had to be Grand Admiral Thrawn. A red beam from one of Thrawn's implants swept over Luke. To the right of the Queen stood one of Luke's prime apprentices, his nephew, the young Kylo Ren, also a Borg drone. Luke checked himself and noticed that he hadn't been altered.
What an honor to have the Grand Master of the new Jedi Order as a guest.
The Queen's voice was haunting. She approached Luke with a serpentine gaze. Green flares reflected off her dark eyes.
The Collective has thorough knowledge of the Jedi and the Force, but we have never directly experienced it until you came to us. Experiencing the Force far surpasses all our knowledge, and for that, I thank you.
Luke drew on the Force to center himself and focused on the Queen. "I find it odd that you'd feel a need to thank me when you could just assimilate me and do it that way." The Queen glanced slowly to the side as if considering this, and with a mild grin she said,
Even I must admit, there is a value in the outside perspective, a way of testing the validity of your objectives, if only as an exercise to accomplish them.
"And your objective is?"
Perfection, of course.
"And you're not perfect now."
The only worthy goal is the pursuit of perfection.
"Perfect for what?" Luke said, as if irritated. The Queen ignored him and shut her eyes. She inhaled as if experiencing a new sensation.
This is a thread leading to perfection.
Luke felt a disturbance in the Force. A nearby drone rose from the deck and floated in midair. Luke looked on in astonishment. The drone was set down gently. Luke looked at the Queen, eyes wide and severe. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Luke said.
On the contrary, thanks to the assimilation of your nephew, Thrawn, and many others, we know what we are dealing with, far more than even you. The combination of machine, biological life, and the Force. This is something you are familiar with.
Against his will, Luke's arm raised up in the air, where his mechanical hand involuntarily opened and closed.
And something your father was familiar with.
A hologram of Darth Vader, unmasked, laid bare, half machine and half man, appeared before Luke.
Your father also sought perfection, for you and for others, but you rejected him. A shame.
Luke used his breath to blow away the rising pain and sadness in his heart. When he was calm, he refocused his gaze on the Queen's dark eyes. "You are angry and alone. You do not know how to change, and you toy with me only to look for something you've lost. If you were so certain in your quest for perfection, I would be assimilated by now." The Borg Queen quickly stepped forward and hardened her look.
You cannot pretend to understand our motivations from the outside looking in. You'll be assimilated soon enough. But first, I must gauge the individual's reaction to something I want to show you. His idea.
The Queen gestured to Grand Admiral Thrawn. With a much brighter serpentine grin, the Queen turned and activated the viewer. The Borg cubes approached a planet surrounded by a vast mechanical ring where thousands of people lived and worked, an industrial powerhouse that produced some of the galaxy's most magnificent machines and starships. Kuat, Luke said.
Correct. We have accelerated our objectives and will now assimilate one of the most advanced industrial centers in the galaxy. We will do it with only 3 cubes.
The shields on that ring network are impenetrable, Luke said.
Not to the Force.
The Queen whispered, raised 2 hands into the air, and grasped them into claws. The massive ring began to shake and glow with small explosions. The Queen made a breaking motion with her clawed hands, while part of the ring snapped into pieces.
We will now begin transporting drones over, who will assimilate the inhabitants. They will assimilate others, until everyone on Kuat is Borg.
The dark side of the Force sees only conquest and power. You're missing the rest.
Foolish Jedi dogma. There is no light or dark side of the Force. There is only the Force. And you will see that as our consciousness becomes one.
The Queen nodded with subtlety, and Luke felt 2 sharp pricks in his neck. Jedi Master Luke Skywalker, it is an honor to finally meet you. Luke turned to see Grand Admiral Thrawn. They stood together on a bluff. The ocean breeze blew upon what seemed to be a forested island. Welcome to Unimatrix Zero, Thrawn said. Thank you? Luke said. Thrawn grinned and invited Luke for a stroll. Thrawn educated Luke about the nature of Unimatrix Zero and how it was comprised of individuals who were strong-minded or Force-sensitive. All the while, more and more people were materializing on their path. Some looked astonished and disoriented. Some seemed immediately at home. It looks as if my theory was correct. We have a lot of newcomers today. Hopefully almost everyone. Ah, there's Xian. Xian was in a clearing, gracefully moving with slow fluidity in a martial sort of dance. I've seen him do this. It's a Chish martial arts form, isn't it? Yes, you are correct. After being shown the basics, each practitioner must create his own form. His own Jin. The operative word is art. Observe. Thrawn gestured to a woman working on an exquisite wood carving, another nearby, an abstract painting, and a Bith seemed to be composing a new musical score. An art class? Thrawn grinned and gently guided Luke to a hologram floating in the air. This is my own work in progress. Starfighter design is an art, don't you think? Nice little fighter, Luke said. Novablade class. Everything you see these people doing here is an original piece, not a derivation, not a copy. It is a willful expression of their individuality. You must also create your own. You must finish it before the end of your regeneration cycle. We must all finish as close to the same time as possible. Luke nodded slowly as he began to understand. Expressing our individuality as we exit the regeneration cycle, there's a good chance, that this art anchors us to the memory of our true selves, and not the Borg collective. We could be severed all about the same time. Xian appeared nearby. I like your form, Xian, Luke said. Do you really? It's full of flaws and imbalances. I'm unable to make it perfect, not in the limited time we have. Besides, he would never approve, Xian said, gesturing at his uncle. Luke and Thrawn exchanged knowing glances. It is a martial art, Xian. By what standard can it be perfect? Perfection doesn't exist, apprentice. I cannot force project like you, and you cannot use telekinesis. Which of us is less perfect? Why worry? We're the ones that have been assimilated, Luke said. Xian shrugged and went back to his form. It took several regeneration cycles to familiarize all the newcomers with Unimatrix Zero, their tasks, and retriggering their creative aspirations, but inspiration spread like wildfire. Luke Skywalker built something of his own, a pair of short lightsabers, ideal for fighting in the tight spaces of a Borg cube. He ignited the blades, turquoise, and twirled them quickly. Xian suggested that perhaps he could create a short form to help him practice, and so he did. Before Luke felt ready, Thrawn approached and said, "It's time." The phrase, "it's time," were echoed among all the individuals in Unimatrix Zero, meaning as their regeneration cycle ended, they were to declare their art complete. Ready or not, perfect or not. Luke practiced his new lightsaber form until he felt his existence fade out of Unimatrix Zero. Luke woke up in a regeneration alcove. He glanced down to see his Borg armor and body. For a moment, he felt anxiety, but settled his mind when he remembered his new lightsabers and the form he had devised. The Replicator. One of Luke's arm implants was a small replicator. Visualizing his lightsabers, with a flash of green energy, they materialized into his hands. When Luke entered the throne room, the Queen seemed to be in a state of frantic confusion.
No more voices.
She said to herself. You are alone, Your Highness, Luke said and ignited his lightsabers. Luke took a step forward, and she said,
Wait!
With a frantic stopping motion. Luke stopped. The Queen's eyes were moist with tears.
I remember something.
Luke tilted his head and said, I? Not we? The Queen activated a replicator. An image of an exquisite wood carving materialized in front of her. She looked at it as if her entire life was embedded into that wood. She looked up at Luke and said,
My name is Lyra Wessex.
Rexley and Rayate stood next to Cyan and Luke Skywalker on the bridge of the Saber.
All the Borg surrendered?
Almost all of them. Some ships self-destructed before all of them could be liberated. Once the drones left the ships, they were destroyed.
And where is Thrawn? We should have heard from him by now.
We don't know, Luke said. He never reported after everyone left the Borg ship, and then it seemed to just disappear.
Well, as much as Thrawn helped us, even so, that is kind of concerning, isn't it?
With my uncle, one can never tell. Even I could never predict his intentions. True. Well, Cyan, perhaps it's time for me to try some force projection. Like you, Luke said. I believe you can do it, Master Luke.
Thanks for watching, Space Friends. I really appreciate your likes, comments, shares, subscriptions, all of that stuff. And whew, this really wraps up a long storyline. Now that this is behind me, and I've completed a move to a new city, it's time to kind of move forward, and perhaps take this channel into a Phase 3, if you will. Basically, I'm looking forward to a lot more audience interaction. And I may be changing my Patreon model to a paper project, instead of a monthly subscription. But there's a lot of new projects I'm looking forward to digging into right away. But I really want to thank you for your appreciation for what I do. It takes a lot for the creative mind to feel safe enough to express itself. And your feedback and encouragement is life-changing, and I really appreciate that. Until next time, Space Friends.